Today we're going to be looking at a poem from the Power and Conflict cluster. We're going to be looking at Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney. So basically there are these people on an island who are preparing for a storm. And it seems like they get storms quite regularly, and they have designed this island to withstand storms and nature. And they stay hiding inside, waiting for this storm to come. They seem powerless and scared. So even though people have built their protected communities to live in, nature is so powerful that no community is ever completely safe from destruction. So basically, this poem is about the power of nature. However, it is important to understand one mini piece of context before we read the poem. On the surface, this poem is a dramatic monologue about people on an island facing a storm. But it can also be seen as an allegory of the political struggle in Ireland at the time. So the storm is actually a metaphor for the period of time in Irish history called the Troubles. Okay? So every time you're reading it, think of the storm and think, but is it really a storm, or are we actually using the storm as a metaphor for war? Let's read the poem. We are prepared. We build our houses squat, sink walls in rock and roof them with good slate. This wizened earth has never troubled us with hay, so as you see, there are no stacks or stooks that can be lost. Nor are there trees which might prove company when it blows full blast. You know what I mean. Leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale, so that you listen to the thing you fear, forgetting that it pummels your house too. But there are no trees, no natural shelter. You might think that the sea is company, exploding comfortably down on the cliffs, but no. When it begins, the flung spray hits the very windows, spits like a tame cat turned savage. We just sit tight, while wind dives and strafes invisibly. Space is a salvo. We are bombarded with the empty air. Strange. It is a huge nothing that we fear. It's a little bit of a complicated one, but let's do key quotes and analysis. I'm going to take you through this poem bit by bit, make sure you understand what is happening. And along the way, I'm going to select around 3 of the juiciest quotations. And what I mean by juicy is quotations that have interesting language devices in there, words that you can zoom into, lots of interpretations, so that if this poem comes up in your exam, you can write at least 3 detailed, analytical paragraphs about it. Let's give it a go. The poem begins, "We are prepared." Notice there is an inclusive pronoun, we. It doesn't say I am prepared, we are prepared. It immediately portrays a sense of togetherness within the community. The speaker is not alone. Then there's a simple adjective, prepared, which implies that this community is accustomed to, used to, fierce elements, and maybe also accustomed to war. There's a sense of arrogance in the declarative statement, we are prepared. They seem too confident in their ability to overpower nature or defend themselves against nature. And they say they have built their houses squat, which means low to the ground. The houses are all low. And with good, strong materials like slate to help with stability in the storm. The 2 phrases that make up that opening line, we are prepared, we build our houses squat, they're actually written in iambic pentameter, which means they're made up of 10 syllables. We are prepared, we build our houses squat. And it's meant to be read in that kind of da-dum, da-dum, da-dum kind of rhythm. And that regular beat gives a sense of solidity to match the buildings. He then says, this wizened earth has never troubled us. There's personification. of the wizened earth, and it connotes Heaney's respect for the earth. Wisdom is associated with the elderly. An old person will be wise. So it's saying the land is much more knowledgeable than man. However, the adjective wizened could also suggest the earth, in its physical state, is dried up and old. So it's also referring to the metaphorical effects of a hard life, with all the energy and all the nourishment dried out of it. This is a country that has been damaged by decades of war. He says, with hay, so as you see, there are no stacks or stooks that can be lost. These lines describe how nothing grows on the ground. There's nothing there, it's barren, and it fails to provide the community with hay from which stacks or stooks, which are basically piles of hay, can be formed. There's no hay. But the speaker says this is actually an advantage. It's a good thing that the land is infertile and empty, because the fact that there are no crops means that there's nothing there to destroy. He says, nor are there trees, there aren't even trees, which might prove company when it blows full blast. I really like this quotation. I think it's got lots of juice in it. So let's analyze it, copy it down, let's make some detailed notes on this one. There are no trees. The speaker says, if they existed, if we had trees, they may have provided company for the villagers when the wind is blowing really hard. Heaney's use of personification here, with the trees keeping you company, creates a sense of companionship and solidarity between the trees and the villagers, showing how nature and humans can sometimes work together. The lack of trees in this area emphasizes the community's isolation on this remote island, hence highlighting their vulnerability. The onomatopoeic verb, blast, it's like a sound word, implies the power, the sheer power of the storm. Notice how the word is capitalized, which kind of increases that idea of aggression. And then the alliteration, the bilabial plosive alliteration in blows full blast, reinforces that sense of violence and suggests nature is attacking the island. That plosive sound, it kind of resembles bullets, making weather seem as deadly as a weapon. The caesura that follows is really important because it mimics that pause, that punctuation mark, it mimics the eerie silence following a damaging storm. Now, metaphorically, think about why Heaney used the word blast. He could have said any other word to describe the storm, but he said the blast of the storm. And that could represent the gunshots or the explosions heard during conflict. Politically influenced violence and terrorism was going on during the time of this poem being written. So Heaney could be making a subtle reference to that. He then says, you know what I mean. Leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale. He's saying trees can actually be helpful when a storm is coming because they make a loud sound, so you know it's time to run and hide. The trees here, represented by the chorus, are personified, creating this image of them gathering and swaying and making loud noises as the storm hits, like a warning that the storm is coming to help the community to prepare. Did you notice Heaney uses colloquial language in "you know what I mean," which creates this really nonchalant tone, proving how the power of wind or the power of nature and the political tensions have become normalized. You know what I mean, just another day, some blast going on. Then if we go back to that idea of the tragic chorus, I could be really clever here and I could link it to the chorus in Greek tragedies. The chorus would narrate and comment on the devastating plot, just as Heaney is doing in this poem. He is commenting on the suffering the islanders experienced. But then the speaker quickly changes his mind. He dismisses the idea that nature could actually help them. And he decides again that, do you know what? The islanders must have man-made shelters in order to survive. That's what we need, not nature to help us. We need man-made shelters. So he says, so that you listen to the thing you fear, forgetting that it pummels your house too. But there are no trees, no natural shelter. He's saying, actually, it's a good thing that we live minimally with no trees, no nature, because there's nothing to distract us. We can focus on our survival. He's actually in my opinion, he's presenting a really tragic, restricted lifestyle in a very matter-of-fact way. We've got nothing, this is what we've got to do. And he says, you might think that the sea is company, exploding comfortably down on the cliffs. There's an oxymoron there, exploding comfortably. And that highlights that the ocean has become really accustomed to, used to, the power it possesses, is comfortable with it. Therefore, it's indifferent to its negative impact on humanity. It doesn't care anymore. The sea is effortlessly powerful and intimidating. It doesn't matter who it attacks. The choice of the word exploding is a further allusion to conflict, explosions. And taken metaphorically, the sea could represent violence or terrorism, and the island community are its victims. And he says, but no, when it begins, the flung spray hits the very windows, spits like a tame cat turned savage. I'm gonna analyze this one because I saw simile, so I know I'm gonna analyze it. The adjective flung to describe the spray of the sea, just flinging around, conveys the carelessness of the gesture, highlighting the sea's lack of compassion and the indifference the sea has to the islanders. Now, if I look at the simile, spits like a tame cat turned savage, it suggests that the sea has turned threatening and dangerous. Through that rapid mood change, the tame cat that turns savage. It reflects how quickly and unpredictably events change. Also, isn't it interesting that Heaney chose the simile to compare nature to a cat? He could have chosen anything, but he chose a cat, which can be both domestic and wild, to convey that nature can be both kind and healing, but contrastingly also inflict suffering and release chaos. Therefore, Heaney is interested in the duality of nature. It is both good and bad. And that idea is reinforced through the contrast between the dental plosive alliteration, tame, turned, and the sibilants in spits, savage. Let me give you another interesting thing to say. A cat is also a pet that is owned by humans. But this proves how the islanders never owned nature. It was always more powerful than them. Mankind has tried but failed to tame nature. And he says, we just sit tight while wind dives and strafes invisibly. Let's analyze this quotation too, it's a good one. There are these long vowel sounds that are really stretched out, while, dives, I. And that is an example of assonance. And it shows that lasting impact of the storm. The personification of the wind diving, because the wind didn't actually dive, creates this atmosphere of unrest, diving, turbulence, and danger. There's a real juxtaposition between the people who are sitting tight inside and the commotion and the chaos of the wind outside. It makes humans seem completely powerless. And the invisibility, the unpredictability of the attacker, the fact that you can't even see it, makes it even more terrifying. That word strafing relates to warplane. It's attacking from an aircraft. So there is a semantic field of war and violence being employed by Heaney, which again reinforces the idea that this poem is really an allegory. And he says, space is a salvo. We are bombarded with the empty air. A salvo is a rapid fire of shots. The sibilance, space is a salvo, imitates the sound of those bullets, and maybe also imitates the sound of the wind during the storm. That reference to space though, space, and empty air, which is a metaphor because the air can't be empty, implies that this conflict has no foundation. It's a struggle based on nothing. The speaker ends questioning the rationality of human fear, saying, strange, it's a huge nothing that we fear. There's an oxymoronic phrase, huge nothing, which means the storm seems really frightening, but it never comes. So it's an anticlimax, it's anticlimactic. They're wasting their life away, preparing for nothing. A bit like exposure, but nothing happens. Or perhaps he's saying that all of this hostility, all of this violence that we are so scared because of, it's all one big nothing. It's space, it's empty air, it's unnecessary. Right, that is your analysis done. However, in your exam, it is not enough to just write paragraphs analysing language and structure. For poetry, you also need to include something called context. And that basically means you need to explain what was going on during the time the poem was written, and therefore, what was the poet's message? Why did they write this poem? What are they trying to tell the reader? So some interesting context points for Storm on the Island are: Heaney is a Northern Irish poet. He wrote mostly about the landscape and rural life of Ireland and grew up in a village as part of a farming community, leading to most of his poems being about normal rural life. Storm on the Island was part of a collection called Death of a Naturalist. It was Heaney's first collection, and like the title Storm on the Island suggests, it was about the violence of nature rather than this romanticized view of nature's beauty. At first sight, the poem Storm on the Island is quite literally about a storm on an island. However, it can be interpreted as an extended metaphor for the political conflict in Northern Ireland taking place at the time of its publication in 1966. I'm going to show you something really clever. The first 8 letters of the title spell Stormont, which is the Irish government building. Also, the title is a pun. Storm on the island, like island, and storm on the island, like the place island. Although Northern Ireland was relatively stable and peaceful following the end of the IRA campaign in 1962 until the start of the Troubles in 1969, smaller scale political unrest was still going on at the time of and prior to this poem being written in 1966. And there you have it. That is a full analysis of Storm on the Island. I hope that makes you feel a little bit more confident if this poem comes up in your exam and you feel like you have some interesting things to say about it. If you found this video useful, give it a like and don't forget to check out the rest of the videos in this series.